Welcome to the War Archive, where wars become stories. Every time one of these ships moves, the world quietly shifts with it. There are no press conferences, no countdowns, just a slow turn of steel across the ocean, and suddenly diplomats start calling, markets react, and generals stop sleeping. This is how modern crises begin, not with explosions, but with movement. In an age where stealth bombers can take off from the American heartland and strike targets on the other side of the planet within hours, one question refuses to disappear. Why does the United States still spend millions of dollars every single day to move a floating city halfway across the world? Why rely on something so slow, so visible, and so expensive? A U.S. nuclear aircraft carrier is not just a ship. It is a city of steel and machinery, carrying thousands of sailors, dozens of aircraft, and enough firepower to dominate an entire coastline. Keeping it moving burns more than $6 million a day. Money spent on nuclear reactors, jet fuel, maintenance crews, and feeding a population larger than many towns. And yet, when tensions rise, Washington does not hesitate. The order is always the same: move the carrier. Because a bomber can strike and leave, vanishing back into the sky. A carrier does something far more unsettling. It stays. By parking an air force just off an adversary's coast, a carrier changes the psychology of conflict. It enforces pressure rather than delivering a single blow. It forces constant calculation, not just during a strike, but every hour that follows. This is why moving a supercarrier is never just a deployment. It is a signal, deliberate, costly, and hard to reverse. And once it begins moving, the clock starts ticking for everyone watching from shore. When a single aircraft carrier changes course, it can be explained away as routine. When several begin to move at once, it becomes something else entirely. This is not a rotation or an exercise. It is a redistribution of power on a global scale, the kind that only happens when decision-makers believe time is working against them. Inside the Pentagon, moments like this are quietly compared to the opening phase of the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Not because war is inevitable, but because the scale of movement is similar. Carriers are being pulled from distant theaters and pushed toward a single region, compressing American power into one place while leaving others thinner than planned. To reinforce the Middle East, strength must be drained from somewhere else. There are no spare carriers waiting in reserve. Every ship redirected toward the Persian Gulf is one less guarding the Pacific, where tensions with China never fully recede. This is the trade-off that defines American naval strategy. Concentration in one theater creates exposure in another. That is why this shift is described as a pivot, not a surge. It does not create new power. It rearranges existing power, reshaping deterrence across thousands of miles of ocean. Allies notice immediately, reading the movement as commitment. Adversaries notice as well, searching for gaps where pressure might be exploited elsewhere. What makes this pivot especially risky is how openly it accepts imbalance. Thinning the Pacific is not a decision taken lightly, and it suggests that planners believe the situation in the Middle East demands immediate attention. When the United States starts moving its carriers like chess pieces, it usually means the next phase may not be easily reversed. On paper, the United States operates 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, a number that sounds overwhelming at first glance. In reality, that figure hides a hard constraint. Carriers rotate through long maintenance periods, training cycles, and crew recovery, which means only a fraction of the fleet is ever truly available to deploy on short notice. Most of these ships belong to the Nimitz class, massive workhorses commissioned from the late Cold War through the early 2000s. Built for endurance, they were designed to operate independently for months, projecting power without relying on foreign bases. Alongside them stands a single example of the next generation, the Ford class, incorporating new launch systems meant to increase sortie rates and reduce strain on crews. But for now, it remains the exception rather than the rule. In peacetime, these carriers are deliberately scattered across the globe. Some patrol the Pacific, acting as a constant reminder of American presence near China and the Korean Peninsula. Others rotate through the Mediterranean or remain closer to home, training crews and maintaining readiness. This global distribution is not symbolic. It is essential to sustaining U.S. commitments worldwide. When a crisis erupts, that careful balance collapses. Maintenance schedules bend, deployments are extended, and ships that were meant to rest are ordered back to sea. The theoretical strength of 11 carriers quickly shrinks into a much smaller pool of usable options. This is why every redeployment matters. Sending one carrier toward the Middle East is not a gesture. It is a subtraction from somewhere else, a calculated gamble that whatever remains can hold the line. And once that decision is made, there is no easy way to undo it. Once the decision is made, there's no gradual buildup. Orders move at flash priority, cutting through routine planning and hesitation. A carrier strike group that was quietly patrolling one region suddenly pivots, its destination rewritten in hours rather than weeks. From that moment on, speed becomes a strategic weapon and a liability. A carrier like the USS Abraham Lincoln is often positioned in the South China Sea, its presence aimed at deterring rival navies and reassuring allies. But when priorities shift, that mission evaporates. The ship can sprint toward the Middle East in roughly a week, an astonishing pace for something the size of a small city. The route, however, exposes its vulnerability. To reach the region, the carrier must pass through narrow maritime chokepoints, crowded, surveilled waters where hiding is impossible. These passages favor the defender, not the mover. For Iran, this is where the carrier stops being an abstract symbol of power and becomes a trackable target moving through confined space. Iran's strategy is not built around matching the U.S. Navy ship for ship. It is built around denial. Fast attack boats operating in swarms, shore-based anti-ship missiles, and ballistic weapons designed specifically to threaten large vessels all converge on the same idea: not to sink a carrier outright, but to complicate every mile it travels. Saturation, not destruction, is the goal. At the same time, a second carrier can be set in motion from the opposite side of the world, crossing the Atlantic and pushing eastward through the Mediterranean. The plan is convergence. Two strike groups approaching the same theater from different directions, creating a pincer of deterrence. But the farther they move, the more the risks compound. As carriers surge toward Iran, the Pacific grows thinner, sometimes dangerously so. One ship may be left covering an entire ocean. It is a calculated gamble, taken with the belief that delay carries greater danger than exposure. Within days, not weeks, two floating cities are meant to sit offshore, close enough to be understood, close enough to be threatened, and close enough to change the calculations on land. While carriers dominate attention at sea, a quieter scramble unfolds in the air. Missile defense is not something that can be improvised once a crisis peaks, and in this scenario, the margin for error is thin. As naval forces begin to move, planners race to close gaps that were manageable in peacetime but dangerous under pressure. Over the past years, parts of the U.S. missile defense network in the region were reduced or repositioned, particularly in places like Qatar. Under normal conditions, this was a calculated adjustment. In a crisis, it becomes an urgent vulnerability. Rebuilding that shield means moving enormous systems across continents fast. Heavy transport aircraft begin flying around the clock, hauling radar arrays, launchers, command vehicles, and interceptors. Restoring credible coverage requires multiple Patriot batteries and components for a THAAD system, a process measured not in flights, but in hundreds of them, each one feeding a system that must be assembled, calibrated, and tested before it can protect anything at all. What matters most is not just how much is moved, but what is chosen. Commanders reach into aging Cold War stockpiles in Europe and Asia, pulling out older interceptor missiles that are no longer cutting edge. Against swarms of inexpensive drones, these older systems are more than sufficient, and far cheaper to expend. The newest interceptors are quietly conserved. They are held back for ballistic and hypersonic threats, weapons designed to arrive fast and hit hard. This is strategic triage in motion, clearing out old arsenals to preserve the most advanced tools for the worst moment. By the time the carriers arrive offshore, an invisible battle has already been fought. One of airlift schedules, inventory decisions, and restraint. Without winning that logistical fight first, even the most powerful fleet would be dangerously exposed the moment the shooting begins. Long before the first missile is fired, war begins to make itself felt through cost. Not in speeches or headlines, but in fuel consumption, maintenance hours, and budgets stretched quietly behind closed doors. Every additional day a carrier strike group remains at sea is a financial decision layered on top of a strategic one. Operating a single carrier strike group costs millions of dollars every day. That money keeps nuclear reactors stable, jet engines running, radar systems online, and nearly 7,000 sailors fed and supported far from home. It pays for constant flight operations, spare parts rushed across oceans, and the endless maintenance required to keep a floating airbase functional in contested waters. Then there is the ammunition. Modern interceptor missiles cost tens of millions of dollars apiece, fired in seconds but manufactured over years. Ship-launched interceptors designed to counter ballistic threats are even more expensive. Even when they sit untouched in their launch cells, they represent enormous sunk cost waiting for a decision to be made. When naval surge operations are combined with strategic airlift, fuel for global transport fleets, and the prepositioning of weapons across the region, the numbers escalate rapidly. A single month of sustained deterrence can consume well over $1 billion. And that is before a single confirmed engagement takes place. This financial pressure shapes every choice that follows. Leaders are not only weighing political and military risk, but how long they can afford to hold this posture. Each day of restraint is costly, yet still cheaper than escalation, and so deterrence becomes a delicate balance, spending just enough to avoid war, while knowing that once war begins, the cost curve becomes impossible to control. For all its power, a carrier strike group depends on something far more fragile than steel or firepower: access. Access to ports, airfields, supply routes, and political permission that can vanish without warning. This is the vulnerability planners fear most because it cannot be solved with missiles or airstrikes. As tensions rise, signs of strain begin to surface. Quiet evacuations from key air bases and hesitation from regional partners point toward a nightmare scenario. If allies fear retaliation, ports can close and runways can become unavailable overnight. A carrier may be nuclear-powered, but the fleet around it is not. Destroyers and cruisers require frequent refueling to maintain speed and coverage. Without friendly ports, the Navy must improvise, creating a moving chain of supply ships stretching thousands of miles across open ocean. These oilers become a floating lifeline, connecting fuel depots to warships that cannot afford to slow down. And the threat is not only physical. Modern warfare attacks systems before it attacks ships. GPS signals can be jammed. Networks can be disrupted. Communications that hold the fleet together can degrade without a single explosion. A carrier strike group runs on information as much as fuel, and when that information falters, coordination begins to fray. This is the quiet danger beneath the spectacle. The most powerful navy in history can be strained by logistics and disrupted by invisible interference. If supply lines break or systems falter, dominance fades quickly, not with a bang, but with confusion. Every plan includes a question planners hope they never have to answer. What happens if the carriers are delayed or never reach the theater at all? Oceans impose their own timelines, politics can close doors without warning, and even the most powerful fleet cannot outrun geography. In that scenario, American power does not disappear. It shifts upward. While steel hulls inch across the sea, another force is already moving at a very different speed. This is where the focus turns from persistence to reach, from presence to immediacy. Air Force Global Strike Command exists for this moment. Strategic bombers can be launched directly from the continental United States and appear over the Middle East within a day. They require no regional ports, no host nation basing, and no advance warning beyond a runway and a green light. This capability bypasses the very constraints that slow naval power. Bombers ignore choke points, sidestep denied access, and operate above the political friction that can paralyze fleets. They cannot linger offshore the way carriers do, but they can strike again and again, sustained by air refueling and long-range planning. This is the insurance policy behind every naval movement. Even if the carriers arrive late, or not at all, the United States retains the ability to act. Speed fills the gap where presence falls short, help temporarily, buying time while the slow machinery of the fleet continues its approach. At the center of this airborne alternative is a carefully balanced trio of aircraft, each built for a different phase of the same problem. They are not redundant, they are sequential, designed to be used in a specific order as defenses collapse layer by layer. The first to move is the B-2 Spirit. Rare and deliberately elusive, it was designed to penetrate airspace that is meant to be unreachable. Taking off from the American heartland, it can cross oceans without stopping, slip through dense radar networks, and strike targets buried deep underground. When planners talk about opening the door, this is the aircraft they mean. Once the most dangerous air defenses are neutralized, the role shifts to the B-1B Lancer. Faster and more aggressive, it flies low and hard, carrying the largest conventional payload of any U.S. bomber. Its mission is saturation, overwhelming what remains of the defense network and collapsing older systems that survived the first wave. Then comes the B-52 Stratofortress. It may look like a relic, but its role is brutally modern. Acting as a flying missile truck, it launches long-range cruise missiles from hundreds of miles away, striking without ever entering hostile airspace. It does not penetrate defenses. It exploits the gaps created by others. This structure exists because even American power has limits. There are only a small number of stealth bombers in service, too valuable to waste on routine strikes. Each aircraft is used deliberately because losing even one would reshape strategic options overnight. Together, these bombers ensure that even without carriers, the United States retains the ability to strike with precision and depth. But they also reveal a critical truth. Speed can substitute for presence, but it cannot replace it. And that distinction brings attention back inevitably to the fleet still moving at sea. For all the attention focused on the aircraft carrier itself, the ship is only the visible core of something far larger. A carrier never sails alone. It moves as the center of a tightly layered formation, designed to survive and fight across air, sea, and the depths below. At the heart of the group sits the carrier, a floating airfield operating day and night. Fighters launch and recover in constant cycles, electronic warfare aircraft shape the battle space, and support planes keep everything moving. The deck is never truly quiet. Even at rest, it feels like a machine holding its breath. Surrounding the carrier are multiple destroyers, their radars scanning far beyond the horizon. These ships form the first defensive ring, built to intercept aircraft and missiles long before they come close. Alongside them often sails a guided missile cruiser, acting as the command nerve center, coordinating sensors, weapons, and responses across the entire formation. Below the surface, the picture becomes even more dangerous. Nuclear-powered submarines move ahead of the group, silent and unseen, hunting hostile ships and submarines before they can threaten the carrier. They shape the battlefield long before anyone realizes a battle has begun. Together, these elements form a self-contained system. Part city, part fortress, part weapons platform. Remove one layer, and the whole formation becomes more vulnerable. Keep them intact, and a carrier strike group becomes one of the most resilient instruments of power ever assembled at sea. By now, the logic seems almost contradictory. Carriers are slow, expensive, and increasingly targeted by advanced weapons. Bombers are faster, stealthier, and far less exposed. And yet, when pressure builds, the United States still anchors its strategy around these massive ships. The reason has less to do with firepower and more to do with presence. A bomber strike is transient. It appears briefly, delivers its payload, and vanishes back into the distance. For most of the world, it is something learned about afterward, through reports and satellite images. A carrier is different. Its arrival is visible, persistent, and impossible to ignore. It sits offshore, day after day, forcing attention and shaping behavior simply by being there. That visibility carries political weight. Allies read it as commitment, a signal that Washington is willing to place people and hardware directly in harm's way. Adversaries feel it as pressure because a carrier does not leave once the mission ends. It lingers, compressing decision-making and narrowing the space for miscalculation over time. This is how carriers exert influence without firing a shot. They turn deterrence into something tangible, not a promise, but a presence that can be tracked, measured, and planned around. The longer they remain, the more they reshape the environment, not through speed, but through endurance. In the end, the United States continues to bet on carriers because nothing else combines visibility, flexibility, and sustained pressure in quite the same way. Speed can shock, stealth can surprise, but presence wears you down. And in long standoffs where the outcome is decided slowly, that constant weight often matters more than the threat of sudden force. As the carriers settle into position and bombers remain on standby, the world enters a tense pause. This is the space between movement and action, where decisions are still reversible, but only at increasing cost. Every refueling operation, every extended deployment, every day at sea tightens the grip of momentum. The price continues to rise even in silence. Sailors remain aboard ships longer than planned. Aircraft sit armed on decks, engines warm, waiting for orders that may never come. Billions of dollars are spent not to wage war, but to preserve the option of restraint. A paradox at the heart of modern deterrence. History offers little comfort in moments like this. Conflicts rarely begin because leaders intend them to. They begin because systems designed to apply pressure slip into motion through miscalculation, misunderstanding, or fear. The more forces are concentrated, the harder it becomes to step back without losing face or leverage. In the end, these carriers are more than weapons. They are countdowns made of steel. As long as they remain offshore, the clock keeps ticking, measuring patience rather than time. And the question that lingers is not whether the United States can fight, but whether the pressure created by these floating cities is enough to stop the war before the countdown reaches zero.